Ashe family, welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective. This is the podcast where we give our point of view on controversial topics from my experience, Black history, and non-knowledge as African Americans. Black history presently lives in us, so we can continue to excel into the future. It's one thing to know Black history, it's another thing to take advantage of what the people in Black history did for you. I am your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is Shaquan Battle.
Yep.
And to the right of him is Jerome Battle.
So,
we appreciate all the love and support we've been getting. I got racist people on TikTok going back at me again. So
you
all is well. All is well again.
Let's take us through it. I know you posted a video.
Yeah, before I even go there, we don't shout out enough people that listen to the podcast on a regular. Shout out to my homie, man. Like, if I upload the episode at 1 o'clock in the morning, it'll have a view by 1:30 in the morning because he be on it. Shout out to my boy Jack Baker. But he called me last week and was like, yo, I was listening to the pod as I always do, and he like, yo, at the end I heard you say something about the Carly Richardson missing. And I was like, yeah. He was like, yeah, you been reading up on the story? I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, so you got to walk it back. So
turn up on
I normally don't walk it back on the podcast, but I got to walk this one back. And Carly Richardson, I'm going to look into the camera when I say this. I know the SPA fired you. I hope you find a new job so you can put money on your books when they lock your ass up, because that was ridiculous.
Yeah, I think on this podcast I mentioned a story that happened back in the day, Tawana Brawley.
Yeah.
Which is why you hear Al Sharpton not as loud as he used to be back in the day. Very similar situation, man, where we go to bat talking about that national media and law enforcement don't do enough when Black people go missing.
Yeah.
People of color go missing. And then when you do get the national coverage, and then this happens, you're like, okay. So now the problem is, and it seems funny. Yes, when you look at it and you go, what the fuck was she thinking? But at the end,
yeah,
this hurts other missing people of color.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what I hate the most, is that now this is going to hurt when you truly have somebody of color that goes missing.
Absolutely. And she really caused us to take a few steps back in our quest to try to get more investigations and more media coverage for missing Black women. And for that to happen, I hope you got, like you said, I hope you brought your toothbrush, because going to jail. You are going to jail. But going back to the TikTok, Jason Aldean, of course, country singer, released a record called Try That in a Small Town. And what he was talking about was, Black Lives Matter protests that turns into destruction of property, looting, or rioting. And basically he was saying, try that in a small town, while he recorded the video in front of a courthouse where Black people were lynched before. And when you talk about small towns, especially in the South, we know small towns is typically the ones that they called sundown towns, typically was the ones that enforced Jim Crow, typically was the ones that didn't want the desegregation of schools, typically was the ones that these are whites only pies, those type of things.
That's right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? So when you talk about that in that essence, like, we know what he meant by try this in a small town. It was a direct shot at Black people, because nowhere in his lyrics did he talk about the state capitol riot. Nowhere in this record did he talk about all of the riots that white people did, the race massacres that happened back in the day. Nowhere did he talk about those type of incidents. He was specifically talking about Black Lives Matter.
Just the terms he used, like carjacking and robbing liquor stores.
Yeah, as if white people don't commit crimes.
Crossing that line.
Yeah.
We know that even back from the civil rights movement, there were lines drawn that Black people couldn't cross, even if those lines were to go register to vote or to vote.
Yeah.
So the terminology, good old boys, is the one that for me, because, and his granddad, he gave him a gun. To me, that's systemic racism. So that's, my granddad handed this down to me.
Yeah.
And now I'm continuing to do it along with my good old boys. And we know what the good old boys terminology really means.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like, of course, the people in the comments saying, Those were Democratic towns. These are conservative towns. Listen when I tell you that black people don't care nothing about the Democratic or Republican Party when it comes to your little racist towns in the South. The
That's
South
right.
was the South. It didn't matter if you were conservative or liberal. The South was the South.
right.
We don't care about that liberal or conservative argument.
If y'all get a chance, please go live in them comments, because those comments are hilarious.
They are super hilarious. Super hilarious. Like I stopped commenting because I just like reading. But shout out to the one racist dude. One racist dude was funny because he said that I could tell that this dude was gonna talk about racism by his headband. That was funny.
That was cute.
That was funny.
Well, there's one black dude in there though. He
wild.
going
He was wild.
he going LeBron in that joint.
Yeah. Then of course there are some black people, and the reason why I did it is because not just of the song, it's because of the person that posted the song, and he called himself Officer Tatum, which he's no longer an officer, but he's made a name for himself by calling himself Officer Tatum, and he, like Candace Owens, Jesse Lee Peterson, go all they do is basically go at the black community. I've never heard these people speak anything good about the black community. I've never heard these people go against their Republican Party. Only thing that they do, they're online to basically create backlash to say, hey, look, not all black people think like this. So we're taking this one black person, we're going to put him in front of black people, and we're going to use them to antagonize the black community. And that's the reason why I really responded to it, because I hate people like that.
Yeah, you know, the thing that gets me is, white America don't need no help.
At all.
They don't need no help. They're doing a great job right now at trying to keep us down. And every time we take a step forward, they try to push us 10 steps back.
Yeah.
And something I want to get into to piggyback off of that. And I know to most people this is going to seem like fake news, because it's so fucking ridiculous that in 2023 this is happening. New Florida standards teach students that some black people benefited from slavery. Because
Here we go.
It taught useful skills.
Let's go.
Let me repeat that, because some people might say, what the fuck did this nigga just say? All right. New Florida standards teach students that some black people benefited from slavery because it taught useful skills. The Florida State Board of Education approved this standard this week. So in Florida, public schools will now teach students that black people benefited from slavery because it taught them useful skills. Part of the new African American history standards that were approved despite being blasted by the state teachers union. They still approve this. The standard even cites, I got to get into it because, like I said, the first time that I heard about this and I've read it, I was like, this got to be a fucking joke. But it's not. It's happening. The standard even cites some people they say are examples of blacks who actually benefited from enslavement. Blacksmiths such as Ned Cobb, Henry Blair, Lewis Latimer, John Henry. Now, Ned Cobb was a farmer and a sharecropper. Was born in 1885. When was slavery abolished? Okay, so when was it abolished? So obviously he was born after slavery was abolished. Ned's father, who was born into slavery, had been emotionally and physically scarred by experiences at the hands of white people, and often responded to his emotional and financial frustrations by doing the same to his wife and his kids and his family. Are those some of the benefits of slavery that they were talking about? So let's just go through a couple of more. Henry Blair, one of the individuals, I think they named 16 people from that benefited from slavery in this doctrine. Henry Blair, born during slavery, 1807, but was a free man, a successful farmer who was illiterate, but invented the seed planter, which allowed farmers to plant more corn using less labor in shorter time. And at the time of the invention, United States allowed free men and slaves to actually patent inventions. In 1857, this law was challenged by a slave owner who claimed that he owned all the fruits of the slave's labor because he owned the slave, including the slave's inventions. This resulted in the change in the law in 1858, which prevented blacks, freed or slaves, from getting a patent because we weren't recognized as citizens. That we benefited from that. Sound like to me they benefited from that.
Yeah.
Let's just now. I know people. We've talked about Lewis Lattimore on here before.
Yeah.
In 1848, was an inventor. His inventions included things like the evaporative air conditioner and improved processes for manufacturing carbon filaments for light bulbs. And then also he helped improve a toilet system for railroad cars. Sounds like to me, this is examples of perseverance and intelligence.
Yeah.
Not examples of someone benefiting from slavery. They even used Booker T. Washington. And this is the one that threw me because I'm like, this is a clear example that white America does not want to teach us the truth. Now they want to lie about Booker T. Washington's heritage. They said Booker T. Washington, who was enslaved, he was, but he didn't gain any of his skills from being enslaved. He was freed at 9. What skills are you going to develop at 9? So obviously he worked in mines and as a houseboy prior to being freed. After that is when he got his education and became the historical person that we talk about when we talk about Booker T. Washington. Now they want to change that narrative. Let me just go through a couple more.
Handle your business.
And I'll just mention James Forston because that's one of the ones that he mentioned who's a successful shoemaker. He was born in slavery in 1776. He escaped in 1784 and then became a shoemaker. How did slavery benefit him? Now, these are examples that they're using.
Yeah.
These are people that they're using, but they're not being truthful. So once again, these are decision makers who are not being truthful. Not only that, they're using falsehoods to teach the children to further push white agenda. Not only that, to further push white agenda, but to tell you that white is better. Right. Not only that, but to tell you that white is right. But more importantly than that, to teach you that white is righteous. That's what they're doing. And I can't believe it's going on in 2023. Along with this standard, it would allow controversial language, as if it can't get any worse, about how slaves developed skills which in some instances could be applied to their personal benefit. It gets worse. The new standard also teaches about how black people were perpetrators of violence during race massacres, including changing the narrative of the 1920 Okaya massacre, when at least 30 blacks were killed for attempting to vote.
Yeah.
But not only that, they're saying that the violence was perpetrated by blacks, some against, but by blacks. But nowhere does it say that whites were the perpetrator. They exclude the word white from this narrative. It's just saying there were some things done against blacks, and then blacks also perpetrated some of the violence.
Right.
No mention of whites whatsoever.
Right.
So now, remind you, this is the same administration that said that they did not want to teach critical race theory or what was an approved African American history standards, because it depicted white people as being bad and it caused dissension. But it's okay for you to depict us as being bad because it even, like I said, as if it doesn't get worse, it even mentions that during slavery that blacks used violence to rise up against the slave owners. This
as if they're the villain of the story.
Exactly. Exactly. Now this was approved. And I just want people to pay close attention to the terminology, because the concept and the narrative is what white America wants you to believe. They don't want you to look at them as bad.
And we are back. Sorry. Had a little technical difficulties. Pops, go right back in, please.
Trying to silence me. I talking about Mississippi and Florida. Boy,
Those don't like that.
in Mississippi, you had a police officer, black police officer, who pulled over 2 black suspects in the vehicle. And he pulled them over because they looked suspicious. So he pulled them over, and he said the lady in the passenger seat was holding the bag, and she looked like she was scared. Nowhere do people understand that when you get pulled over by the police and you of color, you're going to be a little scared. It's just what it is, right? But anyway, the not knowing that the driver of this vehicle had recently had a stroke. And although he could drive, he could not move very easily. So he didn't get out the car when the cop told him to get out the car. And he told the cop, I recently had a stroke. I can't move that fast. I'm trying. Cop wrestles him out, slams his head down on the ground, arrests him. 2 days later, the guy dies from a brain hemorrhage. And they prosecute the officer. As we know, whenever the officer is black and do that, they're quick to respond. Mm-hmm. They prosecute the officer, also taking in consideration that the district attorney is also black in Jackson. Prosecute, jury found him guilty, sentenced him.
That quick, huh?
The attorney general, who's white, who's actually running against this black district attorney for office at some point in Jackson, decides that that's unjust. Oversteps and gets the court to hear an appeal immediately, releasing this officer because the attorney general said it wasn't justified and it should never have been taken to trial, although she approved it. She basically did this to make the black district attorney look bad because they're running against each other for an office. And in Jackson, remember, Jackson is where they want to have appointed government officials and law enforcement officials. And they want them to be all white. And they want to control a predominantly black community. And this is how they're doing it. And again, they're using the same premise as that white is right, white is righteous, and that blacks perpetrate violence, and that we need to oversee what black people do. You have a white society, because we're not just talking about law enforcement. We're not just talking about government. We're talking about white society. White American society feel like they can continue to tell black people what's good for you. The same way they're doing, telling us that. They did this back during slavery. After the Civil War, you had slave owners telling the slaves, you're free, but where you going to go? What you going to do? How you going to survive? Once again, what about all those fucking skills you claim that slavery taught us? So to me, white America knows that's bullshit. But they also know that they have the authority and the support to do it. Why? Majority. They have the majority. They're still the majority. We're still the minority. They're going to continue to do these type of things. Today, Florida. Day before yesterday, Mississippi. Tomorrow, it's going to be Virginia. It's going to be Maryland. It's going to be Texas. It's going to be California. It's going to continue. Trust and believe it's going to continue. They took a poll of Donald Trump supporters and even Governor Santos supporters. And their supporters believe that the biggest problem in America today is racism. Not against blacks, but racism against whites. Can't make this up.
Which doesn't exist.
This is a known fact, and that political parties are going to run on this premise that they are going to somehow narrow white racism. How do you think they're going to do that? They've already started. The narrative, the concept, the fact that you have people releasing videos freely, and until somebody complains, and here's the thing. If you're on a jury and you hear a defendant say, yeah, I killed him and I hope he rot in hell. And then they object and the judge says, jury must strike that comment. Oh, fuck, do you strike that comment? How do you forget that? So at the end of the day, these are things that are being done intentionally to promote white supremacy. You play the video, he can say what he wants. I don't, maybe he's not a racist, don't know. Maybe the people that produced the video are racist, don't know. The video and the content of the song are racist in itself. Whether the people that made it or not is irrelevant. The concept of the video and the song is racist. You can pull the video now, but for the people that already seen it, for the millions of people that posted it again, how do you strike that from your memory?
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, and I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about my granddaughter, grandkids, other kids. How do they strike this from their memory? It's being taught, and it's okay to teach it in Florida. Yeah. It's okay to teach this kind of stuff, man. How you guys feel about that?
I remember feeling uncomfortable in school when they was teaching us, you know, the things that they were teaching us back then.
Like when you saw Roots, you was embarrassed, right?
Yeah.
1 minute.
So I can only imagine what these kids gonna go through when they're talking about, hey, Booker T. Washington and all of these people that y'all look up to are famous because of being enslaved. Like they got those skills from being enslaved, and then of course all the white kids gonna turn and look to the one or two black people that's in that classroom, and they're gonna feel just like I felt when I was in high school or in middle school. But there's no way around that. They pushing white supremacy.
I don't go back to what you said about Florida, because like you said, in that they named 15 to 16 people that supposedly benefited from being enslaved. And even if, let's just say, even if the 15 to 16 people that you used did, that still doesn't compare to the millions of people that didn't.
Absolutely.
So, in essence, if you're talking about from, let's just use this, we're just using this as a reference point, 1619, let's just use it as a reference point.
That's right.
Even though we know people were here before then, let's just use it as a reference point. You go from 1619 to 1863, 1865, whatever you want to do. Let's just use those as reference points. You're talking about generations of people in the mixture of those.
That's right.
So how can you say that the people at the end of slavery benefited because they knew these skills, and then once slavery was over, they was able to use these skills to get jobs or whatever? Let's just talk about this for a second. Here's two problems wrong with that narrative. Number one, it's assuming that Africans didn't have skills before they came to America.
Absolutely.
And we know that's not true. Again, they did not capture slaves. They captured tradesmen, farmers, doctors, nurses. It's insane to think there weren't already blacksmiths in Africa.
That's right.
They want to create the narrative that when we captured Africans in Africa, they were in the jungle with no clothes on and had no culture, no history, no work ethic, all of these things. That's wrong. So by teaching this, it's creating that stereotype that is incorrect when it comes to history.
Absolutely.
Second part of that, let's just say that Africans did have the trades and they were able to get jobs. Here's what happened towards the end of slavery. At the end of slavery, white people created labor unions. And with the labor unions, they went to jobs. These are where some of your race massacres happened. That's right. And killed, beat, intimidated black people to make white people give them their jobs.
That's right.
They had white unions for higher wages. And guess who could not be a part of the white unions? Black workers.
That's why it was called white union.
So you already had black people working on the shipyard.
That's right.
Right? People like Frederick Douglass. You already had black people after the war working on the railroad. And guess one of the two racist places when it came to work labor and work wages because of these labor unions was the railroad.
That's right.
Right? So even if that is true, you're still not teaching the entirety of what happened. So you're creating a narrative to make students believe in your way.
That's right.
By not telling the entire story.
Absolutely.
Going back to creating narratives. The Connecticut State Police Troopers submitted over 25,000 falsified traffic stops on record just to try to get away from racial profiling.
That's right.
So they basically forged these 25,000 traffic stops to say, hey, we stopped white people. Come to find out, those stops never happened. And that was to try to combat the statistics to say that we are racially profiling and stopping black people more than anybody else. Black drivers are 4 to 6 times likely to be stopped than white drivers. There are less than 1% of traffic stops, and black drivers were 34% less likely than white drivers to be carrying anything illegal. The number of blacks being stopped in the day decreased when it became nighttime because it's hard to see who's driving at night. So for the people who saying that, oh, that doesn't exist, I'll give you an example. I was being pulled over when I was 17 years old by a cop. And the first time he pulled me over, he said, I just want to see who was driving this car. And this dude pulled me over 5 times that summer. And for the people who know who I'm talking about, I ain't gonna say his name. Y'all know exactly who I'm talking about. I've had police people tell me, yeah, he was a racist.
We had the captain tell us he was a racist.
Exactly. This is nothing out of the ordinary for black people. And to say all that, I want to go into something. Let's take a quick second off of current events because I read an article and I want to dive into it for a second. There was an article written by a black psychologist, and it listed the top 3 issues that she sees for her black male patients. And it says a lot of black men patients would describe scenarios where they are objectively being treated inappropriately, objectively being invalidated, and objectively being told their feelings don't matter, but it's normal to them. And she says, black people are often shown that it's not safe to express their emotions that stems from adultification and dehumanization. Black children are often taught by their parents that they must be tough because the world is tough on them. But this adultification connects directly to the over-masculinization of young black boys. And we understand that a lot of black children grow up to be black men, suppress their emotions in solitude, and solitary, because they are afraid of opening it up because they have no idea what a safe space is. I want to get you guys' thoughts on this, on just black men in general being afraid to open up because of that image that we have to carry on to the world that was taught to us from a young age.
You see it in the group chat all the time when T lash out. What's the first thing I say? Bro, just say you miss me and you love me.
Yeah.
Like, just say that. But as men, it's hard to say that to another man because we don't know if you're going to laugh. We don't know if you're going to use that against me. We just don't know how to be vulnerable.
Right.
So I know for me, I suppress a lot of things. And you suppress it to the point where you say, maybe that really wasn't important. And right. it could be really important, but you suppress it so long that you say, maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. And then every time it comes up, you say, maybe it's still not that big of a deal. Yeah,
I believe we are vulnerable, but it's a cap on our vulnerability. Right. Like, I think as black men, we've come a long way and we've gotten to the point where we can be vulnerable. But even that vulnerability, it comes at a cap. Like, we're not going to give you everything. Right. We're going to give you enough, and then the rest of it we're going to keep, and we're still going to keep in solitary.
Well, vulnerability for black men has always been considered a weakness, right? No matter what level, even as a kid. And a lot of that is inherited, right? We inherited some of the sins of slavery. Mm-hmm. So when they talk about some of the benefits of slavery, some of those benefits aren't benefits at all. Mm-hmm. Like we talked about abuse in households and family and black households.
Yeah.
A lot of that is systemic, and it stems from being treated a certain way as slaves, that we've taken on those same characteristics.
Yeah.
And the way that we parent, the way that we treat our significant others, the way we react, the way that we act in general.
Yeah.
A lot of those behaviors stem from that. So when we talk about being vulnerable, when you think about Kunta Kinte in Roots, the main focus was he did not want to be broken.
Yeah.
He did not want to give up his heritage. He did not want to be vulnerable and submit to the ways of not just the white man, but of America.
Yeah.
He did not want to submit to those things. So to go against that for as long as he did, continuing to say, my name is Kunta, not Toby. For him to go through that was to not show that level of vulnerability, because not only do your peers see that, but your enemies see that as well.
Right.
And they know how to get to you. So when somebody wants you to do something and they can't get you, what do? They find somebody that you love and they get that person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what slave owners did to get the adults to cooperate. We threaten the kids.
Yeah.
Right? We know you're going to do whatever it takes to protect your child. So you want to protect your child? Get out and pick that cotton.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So a lot of that is embedded in us as Black Americans, and showing vulnerability is a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Crying is a weakness. You know, I even think about when you guys play sports and that first football championship, that Super Bowl that you guys lost, everybody was crying and you guys was crying. I was like, do it now, do it once. I want to see that again.
Yeah.
Right? Not that it was a weakness, but what are you crying for?
Mm-hmm.
Because you were so emotional into that game,
Mm-hmm.
right? Cool. But now you got to pick up the pieces and move on.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do that on emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So that carries over to life. So yes, that's a life's lesson, but it's all about timing and maturity.
Yeah.
So as you mature as a human being, there are going to be opportunities that you're going to need to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Not for anybody else, but for yourself.
Right.
Most of the time, that unfortunately for us, that comes in like funerals, breakups in serious relationships, or in situations with your kids, right? People, things that you care about the most. You're not going to do it on a public forum,
Yeah.
right? It's not going to be because you lost a job.
Yeah.
It's not going to be because, you ran for political office and you didn't win. It's not going to be because of that. But also things that hit that same nerve is when we talk about things like discrimination, injustice, and racism. We get upset about that shit.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to make us feel, they're trying to, and what you talked about, dehumanize us, right? They're trying to emasculate us, right? By doing that. And in certain situations, you have no control over it. So when they're teaching people that you're bad, you're a slave, you're not smart, you're lazy, how do you combat that narrative to people that's being taught all over the world? Yeah. How do you combat that? How do you defend yourself against that? How do you prove that they're wrong? So once again, we feel like we're in a situation where we are vulnerable, and we're vulnerable because of situations, circumstances been created by white America.
Absolutely. And I don't disagree, because I do think tough love helps us.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I do believe that giving that tough love helps us endure and persevere and all of those things and life lessons. But I think for Black men, we've had so much tough love that we don't understand what comfort love feels like. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll give you an example. When Granddad died, I had a lot of emotions going on, and my wife was trying to get me to talk about it. But in my mind, I'm like, I don't know what to say to you.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Like, I'm okay. I have a lot of thoughts going on in my head. I have a lot of feelings and emotions, but I don't know what to say to you, because I don't know how to give you the answer that I think you need.
Right.
You know, to let you know I'm okay. I'm okay, but I don't know how to give you my emotions, because in my mind, there's nothing you can do about it. So there's no reason for me to even talk about it. If you can't solve the problem, there's no reason for us to talk about it. You know what I mean? And we've got that from like I said, at an early age, as boys don't cry. You know, it's time for you to be a man before you even understand what that is. And a lot of times we don't know how to be vulnerable because we've never been in that space. And a lot of times Black men want to protect that image, right?
That's right.
You know, we have an image. So in solitude, you know, we'll cry, we'll have all of these emotions going, we'll drink it away, smoke it away, sex it away, whatever the case may be. But internally, we haven't dealt with the inner of us, because we are trying to portray an image that our family, society, everybody had put on us to be able to hold it together. You know, James Baldwin once said that he was talking to Nikki Giovanni. He was talking about his father. He said, you know, he didn't like the things that his father did, but he said he understands it. You know what I'm saying? He said, you know, I can't have, he said, you know, if you look, my father, he goes to work. He can't come home and say that he quit his job because the boss called him a nigga. Because at the end of the day, our bellies got to be fed.
That's right.
You know,
So
our clothes got to be. So I got to deal with. So at the end of the day, he didn't know how to come home and explain to his kids and to his wife what he was going through. So he had to suffer in silence, and that silence could come out as anger. That silence could come out as bitter. That silence could come out as being empathetic for everybody else.
That's right.
It could come out that way. So he said, you know, I don't agree with what he did, but I understand it now. You know, even in the movie Fences, Denzel in the movie Fences, he thinks what he's doing is being the father that he's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You got a roof over your head, you got clothes on your back, does nothing else you need from me. I'm giving you everything that I got.
I'm doing right by you.
But that young kid wanted that compassion love, that comfort love from his father that he never got.
That emotional connection.
Yeah. And he was saying, this is all I know.
That's right.
This is what my father did. This is what their father did. This is all I know. Yeah. Even as being a husband, I have a home with you. We have kids together, but I'm still going to go out and do what I need to do with whoever. That's all I know. And sometimes as black men, that could hurt us a lot because we don't understand, number one, how to convey our emotions. And when you can't convey your emotions, especially in therapy or something like that, you have a hard time understanding how to deal with those emotions.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a lot of situations, we don't know how to be vulnerable. Nobody's taught us that. You know, my dad was exactly how you guys perceive. That's who he was. Right. You know, and he was legitimately in those same situations where he worked in a all white or predominantly white facility, and we lived in all black neighborhood. But of course, my dad made good money doing what he did. But he had to deal with certain things at work, like being called a nigga. Mm-hmm. Or, you know what's worse being called a nigga? Is being treated like a nigga. Nobody says a word. Yeah. And then you being disliked by the white folks at the job.
Explain that.
So for my dad started out at the post office as an electronic technician. He was the first electronic technician at that particular post office in DC. Which, for those that don't know, we work on all the equipment. It's like a mechanic, but on the electrical and the computer side of working on that equipment. And he was the only black one. And he was the smartest and the best of any of them. So they would always get my dad to do things that the white ones couldn't do. But of course, he got paid less. So to the blacks, he was considered an Uncle Tom. Mm-hmm. To the whites, he was considered a smart nigga that's doing our job. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, what was he supposed to do? Right. You know, was he supposed to say, I ain't doing that, and then lose that position that paid him well, even though it didn't pay him as well as his white counterparts? It paid him a lot better than those other black people were getting paid. Right. So what should he do? So he endured it. You want me to work on your machine? Cool. But my dad was smart. You want me to work on your machine?
And we are back. Sorry. I think I messed up the mics. All right, but go ahead.
Two things that happened in the 60s and the 70s in black households. The first was domestic abuse rose. The other thing is you start creating, that was the beginning stages of single parent homes, where a lot of fathers left. And we could talk about many, many reasons why, but a lot of black men left their families during that time, 60s and 70s, and started creating single parent homes.
Mm-hmm. A lot of it was due to affordable housing and government assistance. Couldn't have a man in the house.
Yep. So, and a lot of the reasons behind it has to do with, of course, economical and financial opportunities for blacks, but also the treatment of blacks by white America. So society was not friendly to people of brown complexion. They just wasn't having it, man. And we talk about it what we look at today, we look at it as on large scale, right? We think it's the worst. But on a day-to-day basis, we don't get called the N-word. On a day-to-day basis, we may not. You can go to a store that's owned or operated by somebody of a brown color. You can do that. 60s and 70s? No. Everywhere you go, you had to deal with them. And you had to deal with them on their terms. And for black men during that time, that was very difficult for them to do. Because you couldn't be vulnerable. You couldn't get caught up in it and end up going to jail, and then you can't provide for your family. So you had to endure it. You had to take it. You know, I remember when the Black Panthers, this was like, I probably was 5 or 6. So this is 1973, 1974. I remember seeing a video, and I don't know who it was, but it was from one of the chapters of the Black Panthers talking about telling people, and I'm not saying I approve this, I'm just saying this is what I heard. Telling blacks, if you're going to rob a liquor store, rob one that's owned by white people. If you're going to do burglaries, break in houses of white people. You know, basically telling them, you know, obviously your frustration and your pain resides with white America. So whatever it is you're going to do the white America, don't do the black America. And I'm not saying I agree with that narrative, but what I'm saying is I can understand. I can understand how at the end of this thing, you want people who control every aspect of your life to know how it feels. Obviously. When we talk about the uprising of the slave revolts against slave owners, part of it was the reason why it was so gruesome, because what they were doing to us was gruesome. And they were returning the favor, so to speak. So hopefully they benefited from that as well.
Just going back, piggyback off what you're saying, like you may not agree with the narrative, but you understand it. You know, I always say this about Brother Malcolm, that he's one of the most humanized leaders that I can think of, because every stage of his life was a reason on why he believed what he believed.
That's right.
So when you talk about, people always say, you know, Malcolm X was, you know, he hated white people. I'm like, okay, well, let's go back and look at Malcolm X's story to figure out why he hated white people. His father was killed by the Klan. His mother was thrown into a mental institution after they said that her father's death was a suicide. How you kill yourself on the railroad tracks by being held down. That's another story. When he was in school, right? He was the smartest kid in his school. And then they told him that he couldn't be a lawyer, that he had to be a carpenter because he was black. And then, you know, he was messing around with a white woman. And then when it came down to it, she's the person that said that he forced himself on her that got him sent to jail, even though that they were committing crimes together. So when they first brought the Nation of Islam concept to his mind that the white man is the devil, he believed that because everybody that he's ever dealt with that was white was against him. That's right. So he believed that ideology because of his life. Now, once he began to get more knowledge and the more he began to go across seas and see other things, his narrative changed. But in a human form, he's a leader that grew with the more knowledge that he had.
That's right.
Anything you want to talk about specifically?
Yeah. Lighten the load a little bit. Let me turn my head backwards for this one. 50 years of hip hop. Happy birthday to hip hop. And the person that I want to talk about, I got to get something out of the way first. And it's bad because we always do this to this one person, but I got to do it. Jay was honored last week. The Book of Hove exhibit at Brooklyn Library, the big library in Brooklyn. I heard a lot of people say the significance of riding past the library and seeing Jay-Z's lyrics outside of the library, because they said growing up they was kicked out of that library as due to racism. I think it's like 13 different areas in there where it got it's 2 floors containing recordings, clothing, artifacts from his career, audio studios, tons of videos, all of those things. But the most important part is it's free to everyone. For those unable to visit the entire exhibit, you can go to thebookofhove.com, and you can see everything on there. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. What I want to talk about, and I purposely did not text you Friday because I wanted to speak about it here. Nas, the greatest storyteller, greatest rapper of all time, mogul, the king, a genius, godson, the street disciple, Nostradamus.
Illmatic, Stillmatic.
Let's talk about
King's
it.
Disease 1, 2.
August 21st, 2020. He drops an album, King's Disease. His first Grammy. Shout out to Hit Boy. December 24th, 2021. He drops a project called Magic. August 6th, 2021. Same year. He drops an album, King Disease 2. November 11th, 2022. King Disease 3. And Friday, July 21st, 2023, Magic 2. It's about, I think it's 13 songs. It may be 45 minutes. Nothing but incredible beats. Nothing but incredible flow patterns. Pockets that he get into. I'm talking about one bar, he might be rapping slow. The next bar, he might speed it up. The bridges, I haven't heard a bridge in a rap record in a long time. The bridge, he might start talking about a story. He was telling a story about Tupac when introducing him to Henny. In the midst of, I guess, him rapping, he remembers the story, stop rapping and tells the story, and then go right back to rapping again. So let's get into the album a little bit. Track 1, Abracadabra. The first bar, he says, "Durag energy, I'm on a wave, you niggas is cat." That's three head entendres right there.
Triple entendre.
Pause. Triple entendre. Don't even ask me how. The next one, Office Hours. He says, "I'm from the hood that started the year after the 80s. After Rakim, I resurrected it. Chest lit, freezing. I'm polar vortexing." And not to mention that song has 50 on it. If any of y'all know about 50 and Nas, they beef for a little while. So for them to put that aside and now 50's on the album, which 50 maybe rap 8 bars, but it was an incredible 8 bars that he rapped because of the pocket that he was in and the flow that he was in. He has a song called Irvin Magic Johnson, and in there he says, "Hip Hop's 50th celebration. Funny, we the same age," which Nas will be 50 this year because he's 49. Nas, in that record, Nas compares himself to Magic Johnson, which is enterprising businessman. With Nas, he has Queensbridge venture firm, which we spoke about Nas's entrepreneurs on this podcast before, but never the music. He invested in companies like Lyft, Ring, which is they sold to Amazon for over $1 billion. Nas earned $40 million because he initially invested $4.5 million. Every time you see Nas, or you think you've heard the best of Nas, or every time you think you've seen the best of hip hop, or you think hip hop has maybe fell off a little bit, we do something else to bring hip hop right back up. And hip hop is the #1 leading genre in the world. Mm-hmm. And if you're not into King Disease because you say that might be too much rapping, Magic is perfect for you because it's just enough rapping and just enough musically. Where King's Disease is a little more, you might have to listen to that same record maybe 4 or 5 times to understand what Nas saying. With Magic, you can understand what he's saying on the first listen. I done listened to this album 4 times already, and it just came out Friday. Amazing album. For him to be 49 still rapping like this, and often which often happens is in sports, you never hear them say who's the greatest, Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, right? What they always say is the 2 greatest. NBA, who's better, Jordan, Kobe, or LeBron? It's always the argument, right? Mm-hmm. We always put the black people do it too. It's not just white people. We always put black people against black people.
Mm-hmm.
Who's better, Nas or Jay?
Yeah.
Why they both can't be great? They both rapping at a high level. They both rapping, and this is what I love about it. They rapping for fun because this is not where their money comes from.
Yeah.
They're rapping. They're not rapping to earn money from rap. They get money other places. So now I can just freely rap.
So who wins in the verses between Jay and Nas?
Jay, come on. I'm a Jay fan. I can't.
Yeah, I think Jay wins, but in going back to what you said, that they're not going back to something Jazz said. You know what I'm saying? They're not rapping for fun. They're rapping because they're artists.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? Jazz, that's one thing Jazz said. A lot of these rappers are rapping to get money. They're rapping to get clout. But you have people who are artists. You have people who are creators and creative in what they do. And Nas is one of them. I heard Dame talk about it, not to just bring Dame up, but Dame was talking about, how Jay-Z, he lives in the spotlight because of who he's married to. So we see all of his business ventures, every move that he makes. But, Nas is somebody that also make moves, but he does it more quietly. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's somebody who does the exact same thing, but he does it more quietly. Like, sometimes his album releases, like you may not even know the album is releasing. But when you just have a knack for what you do as an artist, it doesn't matter. I'm putting the music out, take it. You know what I mean? And that's one of the things that I love about Nas. Is he in your top 5?
Definitely.
All right.
Billboard put out a top 50 greatest rappers of all time list, and Jay was 1, Kendrick was 2, Nas was 3. But I will say this.
I guess they just try to throw the new generation.
I will say this.
That's cute, but
Nas responded on the album, and the lyrics is, "Y'all should be ashamed of your list. I put some pain into this. I put veins, blood, bones, soul. I put my brain into this."
Yeah, Nas is different.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know how you ever really truly create a top 5 or a top 10 greatest of all time, because most people are always going to pick the older school artists.
Right.
But for me, it's you tend to look for artists that, Jay and Nas been doing this for 20 plus years.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's that longevity.
Jay, 1996, right?
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, these dudes been putting in the work for decades.
Yeah.
How can they, and then you can't exclude people like, even though I know Pac can't make another album,
Right.
but how Pac not in your top 5?
And that's the first thing they say about Big is bodies of work. But the bodies of work that he gave you are too classic.
Yeah.
And it's, for me, it's just, even in that short time span for Tupac, this nigga got unreleased music that they could release today and will probably make the Billboard's #1.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I just don't know. And I know younger artists always say that, older people always want to go with the old school artists. Well, I just don't know that you'd be rapping if it wasn't for the old school artists.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with Nas is Nas had that period where, he was putting out like the Illmatic, the Stillmatic, and then he had that gap where people was like, I don't really know if he got it no more. And then
it wasn't never the lyricism though. It was the music,
Yeah.
some of the beats that he was choosing. The words was always there.
Yeah, and you, like they talked about, you start to change, you start to become more mature, you start to talk about things that you feel are important to you. But at the same time, at the beginning, when he first came out, Illmatic might be one of the best hip hop albums ever.
Yeah.
Might be one of the greatest ever.
Yeah.
But it was during the time where he rapped about things that people were rapping about during that time.
Yeah.
And what he do is he created a fan base from that album. Now I got you. Now I can do what I want.
Right.
Now that's where that artist creativity comes in. Now I can do the kind of songs that I really want to do, songs that really matter to me.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the thing is, I'm a whole fan, but for Nas to put out 5 classic albums with Hit Boy in a 3-year span, where with Hov we might get an album maybe once every 5 to 7 years. For Nas to still be doing this at this level, and he still just don't get the recognition that even now. I'm talking about Nas, but what did I have to do first? I had to mention what they did for Jay last week, but He just don't get the credit that he deserves. For me, whenever you rank rappers, it's always Jay and Nas, and then you can start wherever else you want to. They shouldn't even be in that ranking anymore.
For sure.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to talk about was, of course, you know, wherever I go somewhere for vacation or somewhere, I'm looking for the Black history in that location. And one of the places that we went to this last time was Myrtle Beach when we went on vacation, South Carolina. And one of the things that my mom said that when we was down there, it didn't resonate until I started doing the research, where she was like, you know, this year there's more suburban areas with resorts and golf courses and those type of things. So I'm like, okay. And then, you know, I started doing my research, and there's a Black community down there in South Carolina. There are parts of North Carolina. They're in Georgia. They're in Florida, called the Gullah Geechee. And they're African Americans. After being enslaved, we talked about how African Americans lost most of their culture. They lost most of their heritage. They lost their language. But the Gullah Geechee is one of the Black communities that preserved a lot of their African culture. A lot of the time, one of the reasons why is because if you go to the coastal parts of South Carolina, and they're like small little islands, and most of the time you didn't even have a slave master out there. You had an overseer that was on the property for the slave master. So the Africans outnumbered the white people on these islands. And when they outnumbered them, they was able to keep a lot of their traditions, their culture, their heritage. But one of the reasons for the Gullah Geechee, again, going back to what we was talking about with Florida, one of the reasons why they was chosen to be enslaved is because of their ability to farm and rice, like their agricultural ability in rice farming. And that's what they wanted to do in areas of South Carolina and Georgia, was grow rice. And another reason why, because they lived in West Africa and it's tropical areas. So if you bring them to the coastal areas of South Carolina and Georgia, they have the ability to not die from malaria.
Right.
They're
Similar conditions.
Yeah. So they're able to flourish, and the rice can be able to grow in this area. But they was able to, like I said, they was able to keep their music, their language, their religion, their food. And when we talk about language, a lot of them speak what they call a English Creole language. And a lot of the language is very, very similar to the language that they speak in Sierra Leone, which is in Africa. And the Gullah, the word Gullah is actually a word that comes from the Angola tribe of the Gullah, which is in Sierra Leone and on the border of Liberia. And then, you know, during the Civil War, a lot of the white owners and overseers fled the actual coastal parts and went back to the mainland of South Carolina and Georgia. And this left the Gullah Geechee basically on these little islands by themselves. And they were one of the first communities that the Union soldiers went to and told them that they were free. And they stayed on these remote rural areas in the low country parts of, again, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and parts of North Carolina. But right now they're fighting to keep their land because of what they call, hold on, I'll give you the correct term of the Harris property. So Harris property is the land that they've been on since the end of the Civil War. Instead of going to the courts during Jim Crow era to put basically the deeds and the titles in their descendants' name, they just passed it down from generation to generation without the legal work, without the paperwork, because they knew in Jim Crow they were just going to come take it.
Right.
So now with the Harris property, which means if we're a descendant of our ancestors, this means that a bunch of us have shares or rights to the land. So what a lot of white companies are doing, they're going and get one descendant to share their property of the land and then taking that to court and then being able to gain the entire land for development of those resorts and those golf courses that they're building down there in Myrtle Beach. So a lot of these people are working to gain their lands. It also leads to a lot of history that's not talked about with the Gullah people is the Gullah Wars. And what the Gullah Wars was in areas of South Carolina and Georgia to be specific, they were in close proximity what they called the Native Americans, which were the Seminoles. And one thing that they had in common was the enemy of being slave owners and the colonizers, because one thing that the colonizers was doing was they was making deals with the Native Americans and then going back on those deals, pushing them out of their lands for money. And then, of course, the Africans were enslaved by them. So they basically band together and they was going plantation to plantation, freeing black people. And like on a couple podcasts ago, I ended up talking about it. They ended up living in their own free community down there in Florida. And they fought like 3 different wars with the American military to stop going back to being enslaved again. And in history, they call it the Native American Wars or the Indian American Wars or something like that. But the Gullah Geechee was involved in those wars side by side with the Seminoles, and they created their own little culture. So when you hear Black Seminoles, those a lot of older Gullah Geechee people that was with the Native Americans, and they became basically one tribe. And they fought so horrendously that even when they were taken over by Andrew Jackson, they did not put them back into slavery. They sent them to Oklahoma because their mindset was we would never be enslaved or we would never cooperate enslaved. That's right. But the Gullah Wars was a huge contribution to them abolishing the slave trade. Because if we're bringing over the slave trade, we're bringing over fresh Africans, they're going to have that same mindset mentality, because they're used to being free. So they want that freedom. But if we able to abolish the slave trade and just keep mass producing African Americans who have been born into slavery, that's something different. So I just want to go through that little bit of history on the Gullah Geechee.
That's fire. And
if you go to Myrtle Beach, they offer different tours and different museums down there about the Gullah Geechee.
We gotta do that next year.
Yeah, when I looked when we was down there, they was only offering on like certain days, and we had missed the day that they were offering it.
We did go the week of the 4th.
Yeah. But yeah, but we love y'all. We appreciate y'all. Peace.